The original plan was to do this episode in full cosplay, and then I realized that I just don't care enough. I'm wearing my Tom Baker scarf, right? And 10th Doctor colored shoes, and so whatever, just no. You know what? Roll the credits. Roll the credits. Welcome to my mental breakdown, by the way. I got to do one of my very favoritist things in the world this past weekend. I got to go to the Gallifrey One convention, which is the largest North American Doctor Who convention. It's just a 3-day celebration of all things Doctor Who. I have, on a couple of occasions, gotten to speak on panels just because I'm such a massive fan of the show. This year, I actually moderated a panel, and the panel was called More Life Lessons. I need to look this shit up. What was the panel actually called? I think I said it wrong when I was actually moderating, which is kind of hysterical, right? More life lessons from Doctor Who. Really what this panel was actually about was mental illness as it related to Doctor Who and as it was handled in the show. And they were like, hey, you talk about this stuff on the internet, why don't you moderate it? So I did, and I had spoken on panels before, but I'd never moderated before, so this was a new experience for me. I just kind of wanted to slightly go over some of the stuff that we talked about, because I think it was a really interesting conversation. Some of the things that I asked were characters or stories that people identified with. We talked about Vincent and the Doctor a lot. That's the name of an episode. If you're not familiar with Doctor Who and you're watching this, I really suggest that you watch it whether you have depression or you know someone who has depression. You know, the idea is Amy thinks if she can just make Vincent happy, his depression will go away and he won't kill himself. And, you know, there aren't a lot of Doctor Who episodes that deal specifically with suicide, so I think it was interesting that they specifically chose a historical figure who killed himself. You know, in the beginning of that episode, she doesn't understand the difference between depression and being depressed, and by the end of that episode, oh hell yeah, she does. The outcome, in a way, was still the same. It's like, and it hits her like a ton of bricks, and it's hard and it sucks. It's the part that people don't talk about as much is the other people around us and how they don't understand it and how that's not a bad thing. It's just a matter of them learning. We talked about characters that I expected people would find relatable, like Donna, and then there were characters that I less expected, like the Master, and the Master is clearly an abusive character, but he's also being abused. If you look at his trajectory in the modern series, the idea that the Time Lords put the drums in his brain to home in on him and find him because he's always after the Doctor, and it's not even about the Master, it's about the Doctor, and so it just like makes it all the more like evasive and gross. And then we talked about episodes that made you realize things about yourself. We talked a little bit about Doctor's first appearance and that idea of being reinvigorated, having this moment of, oh, I care about life. For a lot of us on the panel, our introduction to the show was with Christopher Eccleston's first season, the first season of the reboot, and him grabbing Rose's hand and saying run gave us that sense of excitement. We also talked about like whether there were any ways in which they maybe mishandled the episodes, and we thought for the most part, you know, they did a pretty good job actually, but you know, there were a few times when it was like, because characters with mental disabilities are usually on this show for such a short amount of time, sometimes we don't get to see the full scope. The question of River got brought up. They use the word psychopath a lot, and there's kind of some sort of like, what exactly does that mean, and are we using it correctly questions that get brought up. This seemed to be kind of a blanket feeling across the convention that disabilities, whether they be mental or physical, are sometimes used only like when they're needed and they're kind of ignored the rest of the time. We talked about the Doctor a lot, his PTSD sort of like definitely 100% he has that ever since the modern series, and whether or not he was arcing. He starts out as Christopher Eccleston and he's kind of like maybe not the most friendly, you know, and then he regenerates into Tennant and Smith, who seem a little bit lighter, but I think that there's still definitely that darkness and it does definitely come through, you know. And then we had Capaldi who was much darker, and now we have Jodie, and she seems to be kind of lighter again, and we're wondering, has the Doctor maybe kind of come full circle from that darkness? Has he healed to a certain extent and he's not maybe carrying around as much guilt? What representation do you hope to see in the future? This is the last thing I asked. If we have a character with a disability, have them on for a set amount of time, maybe even as a regular companion, but then also not make it something that you only address when it's convenient to the plot. Like the way we were kind of hoping that they could, in future seasons, maybe handle Ryan's dyspraxia better. See, last time I did an episode, I made sure to do it when he was asleep, and I didn't have the time to tire him out this time, so this is just the way it is. He's been watching my mental breakdown. Curio does this thing. I always feed him first before I have breakfast or dinner myself, and he still wants whatever I'm eating. So he does this weird thing where when I have something that he wants, he like goes like this. I don't know why he does it or what he thinks it accomplishes, but here it is.